Randy, you wanna just kind of do a quick overview of your budget? And
You wanna go department by department or division? or-
just the division as a whole, I think, is
Okay. In the division as a whole, the recommended for, within your budget packet, Division of Health and Family Services, county share ends up being 35,099,094. The public health has an increase from 13 to 14. Community services has a small increase. DFS has decreased. Youth Bureau, small increase, and aging, and a increase in ACC. I believe, depending on the IGT, has how that gets counted, has an increase.
Now, what do you attribute this decrease from, 500,000 from 2013 amended to 2014
I'm
recommended?
sorry, could you?
In DFS?
407.
Okay.
Last year was 500,000
Okay.
more than projected for next year, so
In the DFS one, Cora?
that's on page 407, county share.
Yeah, I don't know if division is.
All right, the division as a whole,
There we go.
the Medicaid decreased, what is that by about? What is it?
I know we had a big chunk, a big decrease because of the heat overtime.
Right, heap overtime is, decreased, but the Medicaid payment, the local share on the Medicaid decreased also.
Local share on Medicaid, that was one of the mandate, to cap it at 1%.
It's within, Mary's gotta help me out with the,
2% this year.
And then it goes down to 1% and then down to 0.
But there's one less weekly share this year.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
There's one less weekly share this year.
And is that what we attribute that 500,000?
Right, because it's 394,000
A week?
a week.
Every week.
That is a form of mandate relief, correct? That's a form of mandate relief coming from the state, correct? The decrease in the percentage?
From their perspective.
From, yeah, right,
Whose
from their,
perspective?
from the state's perspective.
Well, we've got a ways to go.
I mean, it certainly helps if they're capping it, but I think the counties, if they had their way, would eliminate it, but that's
Well,
not
like every
reality.
other county, every other state in the union.
But at least it's a step in the right direction.
so overall, to get to that final number, I think there's about approximately 1 million in reduction in the DFS budget, and then again, in the other departments, there are some increases, and you end up with the net of $500,000 reduction within the division.
And that's, not losing jobs and increasing jobs.
That is, within DFS, there was a request to add 3 additional senior case workers in child protective, but at the same time, we did eliminate 3 positions that are vacant right now. That all 3 were a higher local county share because of the programs that they were in. The senior caseworkers in child protective are at a high rate of state reimbursement.
Got it. Thank
So,
you.
if I could ask a question, when it comes to the Medicaid reimbursement, if I was on Medicaid, am I going to have less care? I go to the doctor's office, it's not gonna be covered, what happens to
Now,
them?
This is simply a financial arrangement on who pays the Medicaid bill, whether it's the state versus the county. It's just, it's shifting the liability a little
Okay, so the person
bit.
in need
The-
of
the-
Medicaid still gets the same care?
The services don't change, it's the financial arrangement between the state and the county.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
and because we're going to a fully managed care program in Medicaid for New York State, there's an anticipated decrease in the overall spending for Medicaid, because the managed care organizations will then be able to pick vendors and probably drop the rate that they have to actually pay.
And right now, we're still at 248 million in Medicaid revenue, quote unquote revenue and quote.
Medicaid is 196 million.
Okay. And that's not just the what's coming into the county, that's also, I mean, that's coming into the county regardless of whether you're, a not-for-profit or whatever. Okay.
No, it isn't.
So currently, right now, where are your staffing levels? If we look at, the department as a whole?
In terms of positions filled, or, I mean, we were, right now in the division, there may be 5 to 6 vacancies that I think will get addressed at the November executive committee meeting.
In total, 5 or 6?
In total. Which is, the legislature was very supportive in 2013 in terms of filling vacancies and expediting the filling of vacancies, and that's been helpful to, continue to provide the service, so that's much appreciated. Probably the major unknown for DFS is the impact of the health exchange. And right now, residents of New York can make application inquiry on the health exchange. The state is gradually taking over the administration of Medicaid. We do still get an administrative allocation for providing Medicaid services. The state has taken over the recertification part of Medicaid for applicants, and over the next 12 to 24 months, we'll see the state being more active in taking over Medicaid. Right now, it's a bit confusing in administering Medicaid because individuals who are making applications through the health exchange are thinking they're going to become eligible immediately. The eligibility through the health exchange takes effect 1/1, and we are still processing Medicaid applications on a day-to-day basis as people come in.
Do they have a timeline when they expect this turnover to have been completed, or they don't know?
I think there's there's timelines, but that was pre-success of the health exchange, and I think with some bumps in the road in the health exchange, it gets pushed back. I mean, our biggest question is the state going to provide the administrative allocation in 2015 to DFS to continue to provide Medicaid services, and we believe they are, but beyond 2015, I think we'll see that allocation go away.
So does that mean that at some point we'll become like the other 48 states where this, it's 50% the state, 50% the feds, as opposed to 50, 25, 25?
This is only administration, it's not the cost sharing.
I mean, I think the cost sharing, in an ideal world, the state would take over the locality's local share in the Medicaid, which is $22 million right now. We don't have that, so that is a tremendous expenditure right now. But in terms of, I think the state will be administering the Medicaid program probably within 2 years in its entirety. But then we'll still have that local cost, that 10%.
If I could, I don't know if you need to see this, Randy, on page 409, PH Agency Administration. On 2013, it was allotted 0, and recommended this year is,
Okay, there was used to be in 13 one organization that housed the public health main unit, the CHA, and your
It was agency
admin. We've since split that up so we could have a better accounting of primarily how the CHA is performing, so we can kind of see. It just got lumped in, and it was hard to discern. Because the question always arises, well, is the CHA making money, losing money? And it was, when you looked at the budget, it was very hard to see because you had really truly admin costs built in there that had really nothing to do with the CHA. So you'll see what used to be one org, you'll see this in 3 spots, maybe 2. You'll see zeros going to numbers. So it's one org. What used to be one org is now 3.
If you go to page
the
4,
CHA now has
Its own
3.
separate.
no, if you go to page
It
411,
used to
you'll
be
see the
lumped
reduction.
in. What is now 3 used to be 1s, and the child was one of. You had one org with 3 functions: admin, CHA, and some of your other agency admin stuff. That is now delineated in 3 separate organizations, so it's just clear, so you can kind of know what the service is really costing or making, versus, like, it would be hard without having your cost allocation done to know how they perform.
So will we get a midterm report on to whether or not they're, breaking even, costing or
Well, I think that's the
saving money?
idea. It'd be easier to just then look and see the performance of, in this case, the child, to see how they're doing versus before. You would have to go to the department to find out what the performance was. You wouldn't be able to have like a public document easily ready available to look at to see the performance of those 3 separate and basic functions.
I mean, in the past, it seemed to be understood that the child was saving us money by keeping people home and all the rest of the things that the child does, you know,
Well, yeah, there was a time, and I don't know what we've got the most recent one for last year, I assume we have, but I mean, if I recall, the child was, when you group it with long-term, was historically making money, but the state has since not allowed Article 6 state aid to be applied to the CHA, which I know to my knowledge, 2 years ago, that turned the CHA from making money to losing money. Not a lot, but it flipped it from us making a couple $100,000 to losing a couple $100,000. So I think if that continues, I think the idea would be so you can easily see what the performance is of that unit or that function versus it being buried in with admin and other things, so you'd have no idea what the performance really was.
Well, it just gives us a truer picture.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, I'm still stuck on page 407.
Okay.
Can you tell us what's going on with the IGT, well, I used to call it IGT, but this is inter-transfer
I got the right,
reverse.
so you're not gonna see it.
So, do you have the same page?
407, right?
It's, cause that's always been kind of a rogue element, if I can use that word, as to when the state pays it. And is this specifically for the adult care center, is it all lumped in together? Here.
It has nothing to do with IGT, it's on page 407, that's just a transfer from the general fund to,
It's not a state transfer?
that's not the IGT for the nursing home, no, I don't
Okay,
believe
so
so.
then can you explain the story behind this line?
Mary, you wanna help me with the,
That's the
It's
transfer.
not, sorry, no, it's not the IGT, it's the internal budget transfer. It went
All of
from
these.
500,000 to $1 million.
Interfund transfer.
The only,
Interfund transfer.
the Division of Health and Family Services, other than the ACC, is all contained within the general fund. So you don't see a transfer, you just see a county share, which the tax levy would then raise. The ACC has its own separate fund that the general fund has to transfer money into to make them whole. That's what that represents, that 1.2 million or whatever it is the transfer from the general fund to the adult care center.
And so it's gone from 553 to 1.2 million. I just want the story behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Nursing home
when,
lost that much more money.
well, I think when we get to the nursing home, we can discuss their budget, but that's,
Okay,
that's
so
what
this
that
is-
is,
okay.
what,
Got
so
it.
that is money that went from the general county
To make
budget
them whole.
to the adult care center budget.
well, I think if we get, because you really need to look at the cover page for ACC, because there's also the additional county match on the IGT, so that's not really the true picture of what you're supplementing the nursing home by. If you go to the,
We're supplementing it by more, we're
More.
supplementing it by less.
more than 1.2. It's 1.2 plus the county share of the IGT. I'd have to go to find the page.
We wanna go.
It's on the cover of the, it's page, what is that?
576.
576, there's a footnote at the bottom. So you can see that it shows that their county share is 0, but that's because we're transferring 1.2 million in, plus there's an additional 1.2 in the DFS budget to draw down the IGT payment. So the real county share is about $2.5 million as budgeted.
Where are we? I'm
Page
sorry.
576, if you read the footnote
just
at the
the-
bottom,
okay, got it.
will give you kind of, there's two things that make up, in essence, their county share. The transfer from the general fund, and then there's also monies allocated in the DFS budget to draw down the intergovernmental transfer.
send that IGT payment to the ACC from the state. We got it this year, next year possibly, there's no.
The problem with the IGT, it's always on a lag. We budget for it, but potentially don't see it for a year, 2 years, some cases 3 years down the road. And then from our contacts, it's certain we're gonna get it. I think through what 15 potentially, but beyond that, there's a big question mark on how, if that's gonna exist in that same fashion and the amount, or there's gonna be some other revenue stream, or it just goes away altogether. That's a huge unknown down the road. But from what we're hearing, the IGT as it exists in some similar fashion, funding wise, is going to exist through 15.
Yeah. It's when the lights go out. Can you?
Well, they don't go
Sorry.
out, but.
No, no, don't quote me on that, sorry. I don't want people calling me up at home saying, did you say the lights were going out? I did, but not now.
Yeah.
Maybe just dim a little bit.
I apologize for any possible
saving bulbs.
misconstruing of
They'll
that
be turned,
statement.
they'll be turned
In a
back
different-
on in a different.
In a
They'll be
different
turned
way.
on in a different way, okay. So, can you just, give me the story behind the debt service, what that debt service was for? It was, here,
What
you've
page?
got different,
What page?
you've
He
got a
has the
different
same-
work.
He has the same
I have the
Oh.
same, I have the same, I
Okay.
just have,
576.
I have by
Same page.
department.
It's just part of the ACC. I don't know what the specific project was, but it's just making their annual debt service payment on some bond issue that still exists. I can get you the exact details on what that is actually paying. I don't remember what the last renovation was, but it's for some sort of capital work that had taken place in years past. It's just the annual debt service payment associated with projects that had taken place in the past at that facility.
So, Rand, if we look at division as a whole, and I know you've set some priorities for the division moving forward, streamlining programs and putting policies in place and different things like that. If you could identify, you know, your top priority to try and I think the goal is to maximize efficiency, reduce the cost of county property taxpayers by focusing on improving internal operations. What would you, focus on?
Well, I think, you know, today when we're doing the budget presentation, it is presented as a division, right? And how it operates really in reality is 6 departments within a division. So the object in the next year is to really have that truly one umbrella organization and to, you know, share resources within the division in areas such as finance. Right now there are, I mean, Lesha's department is Lesha's superwoman and her department, she does it all. But in the other 5 departments, there's an FAO in each department. There are account clerks in each department. There are functions that we wanna look at that are similar that we can share staff. So if one department's down, we can pitch in and help out. That's an example of an area where to consolidate. There are some consumers of the service that touch 3 or 4 different departments that, I know there are single points of access for children and then adults, but I think we have to now use the New York State Department of Correction parolees, that population as an example, where those individuals upon release, we need to do more planning prior to release with parole. And then we had a good meeting that we'll talk about in health and family with parole. But those folks access public health, they access community services, and then obviously come to DFS. So really coordinating our intake processes and sharing services and resources. And I think with Ms. DeJesus in the ACC, she has extensive experience and background in long-term care. So, you know, utilizing that expertise in addition to her running the ACC on a day-to-day basis, but in terms of planning our services. So really the concept of a, you know, umbrella with 6 departments under that umbrella instead of 6 different umbrellas out there, I think we will be able to
And I know one
be
of
more efficient and effective and lower the taxpayers' burden.
And when you
cost.
talk about that streamlining, I know one of your goals is to do that by, attrition, reassignment of, positions within the division.
Right.
So, you're not looking at, losing jobs or anything.
No, I think Medicaid is an example where there's 16 staff still in Medicaid. Through attrition, obviously one of the positions that we are going to abolish is the director of Medicaid. That position has been vacant since January of 2013. With Medicaid, with the state taking it over, we don't need that director of Medicaid. As there are examiner openings in food stamps or SNAP or HEAP or childcare, we will reassign that resource from Medicaid to there. So I do not anticipate, as vacancies in the examiner series come up in 2014, saying, well, I need to fill this necessarily, but, do it through reassignment of staff in Medicaid.
So, can I go back to the ACC for a second? Were you involved at all with the, RFP with Rothenberg for the ACC?
The RFP for what?
Rothenberg, wasn't that the name of the company that was
Before the
used?
RFP went out,
survey.
they were
Yeah.
given a copy of the RFP for comment.
Right.
Virginia, I'm not sure I know what you're asking.
The one I
Okay.
mentioned yesterday at the meeting that's doing an analysis as to.
Oh, yes, I'm aware of it.
So you had input into what the outcomes are gonna be, or what information is gonna be asked?
I believe the finance department before she resigned had some input and information on that, but I myself, in terms of being actively involved,
What's the time frame on that?
No.
Thank you.
We're going back and forth, and as of yet, we haven't signed the engagement letter, but I don't know if we wrote in exact time frame on them. Is there a time frame?
No, there's not
So has that work been commenced already? And
No, we haven't. We're going back and forth, almost like it's not. We don't sign a contract, but it's an engagement letter, like we sign with auditors. We're probably going to be signing that in the next couple of days.
Okay, so that was just, ongoing because you were gathering the data, is that why?
Well, it's making sure from their perspective and our perspective, we fully understand what the deliverables are and that we're covered from both sides, so that we're going to get a product that we'll be happy with.
So you would have a report for,
Yeah, let me talk to them to see exactly when they think they'll likely be issuing a draft that we'll probably review and then have some dialogue back and forth on the draft, and then at that point would get finalized with them having a presentation, probably in Health and Family or whatever committee the board chooses.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. What work are you talking about?
The financial analysis, the
Of the
projections for the ACC.
that was through our committee.
Okay,
through,
whether or
through
not
the
it's
committee.
it's profitable, losing,
Right.
and how much?
Simply
Okay.
just the pro
Right.
forma of, well, here are the next 5 years or so of what the supplement to the nursing home would look like with all these federal and state changes on the horizon.
Okay, thank you.
And with the redesign of the ACC, with the Alzheimer's unit and the short term, and gearing up, ramping up, getting staff trained, it's a little bit unknown in terms of the acute care aspect too, in terms of it's important to fill the beds and have that regular, because people will be there shorter, they'll be leaving, and keeping people coming in, so. And then the rates and the proper reimbursement, and Mr. Jesus has been working on training staff, getting staff trained. And her next area to train is, she's been in dialogue with the Alzheimer's Association about offering a training for staff for the dementia unit.
So this particular RFP, this piece of work, is not going to look at my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that there are 3 different models out there to date that we know of, which is public, which is what we have, private, which is what Orange County's gone through, and a not-for-profit, which is what an LDC model, which is what Ulster is going through.
This
You're
is
all
just,
shaking your heads,
this is
saying
just
no.
this assumes the new model that Commissioner Parker was saying with the Alzheimer's unit and the short-term rehab, assuming that is the model, and then it's with their expertise in the federal and state reimbursements with public nursing homes, they're gonna overlay those two factors and say, well, assuming you're in the nursing home business for the next 5 years, this is what the financial picture will look like. That's all it's doing. It's not making a recommendation on doing X, Y, or Z.
Now I understand, thank you.
And the short-term model will, encourage the nursing home to be able to do things that other nursing homes do, such as IVs and that kind of thing, which ours does not.
Right, it's
We
going to make us
transfer
more,
back to the
more
hospital.
competitive and attractive to residents to come there as they would right now to maybe a private facility. And then I think, again, Mr. Jesus is working on, you know, the whole IVs and maximizing. I mean, there are, historically, I think maybe some services have been provided but not taken credit for and billed properly, et cetera. So she is really looking at that to maximize all levels of reimbursement. But with the HEAL grant and the, you know, construction, it's a more attractive facility than it has been.
That was the intent.
Right. Now we gotta get the staff, especially with the dementia unit, you know, some specialized training in working with that population.
If I could just ask another question. If we focus on, first of all, I just wanna say a lot of positive changes coming out of the division. I'm chair of the division, and, I think, you know, coordinating, increasing our oversight over things, the programs, from foster care to CPS is all positive. But if we were just to focus on reducing the cost of the county's property tax, that's one of the goals of the division for 2014. And we look at programs that are mandated programs, non-mandated programs. We look at state, federal, county share funding. What do you see in the division as far as the county's property tax reduction as areas which we as a legislative body could review or focus on?
Well, I think in public health, the largest part of the local share for public health is the early intervention pre-K program. I think if that early intervention pre-K was out on its own, just as an example, the local share for public health is minimal without that EI pre-K expenditure. So I think we have to ensure we have the necessary resources in EI pre-K. I think right now we have Superwoman running EI pre-K by herself without a lot of support, and that's a very large local share expenditure.
Now, just explain that to me, because that's the state, now has, taken over the EI. What are the implications?
But the pre-K, you have children in the pre-K program who are placed by their respective school district into a center-based program that could be $30,000 per year. Now, granted, these are absolute services that the kids need and will benefit from, and by getting that, hopefully, they'll be more prepared for school and be more productive down the road. So it's an investment in the future, but it's a tremendous local expense for that pre-K placement. So we need to make sure we have staffing. They just did a project where they had to go back and bill Medicaid for a 2-year period, and it was really all hands on deck. Used other staffing within the department to get that job done. But we gotta ensure that we have adequate staffing in there to regularly bill Medicaid, to maximize Medicaid, to get third-party reimbursement where possible, to work more closely with school districts about, do we have to have, you know, full-time center-based placements all the time. So again, it's a tremendous local share to the county with really a very small department, which really with its expenditure, Maryland, do you know the total cost of EI pre-K off the top of your head?
Something like gross cost?
Yeah, gross cost,
It's almost 6 million.
Yeah.
$6 million program, and the local share of that is,
63%.
Well, that's
of our department.
Yeah, but I think he's talking about the actual dollar amount, and we're talking about a county share at least projected for 2014 of
Right.
almost 2.7 million.
That makes sense.
so that's a large local share, so that's a program where we really want to focus on it. And we've had discussion within the division if, is that where it belongs? Does EI pre-K belong in with public health? Should it stand on, alone as a separate department? Should it be with community services? Should it be with DFS? I mean,
But
we
can
really.
you do that, conversation without actually cutting the quality of the care that the children receive?
I
Is
think
that-
so. I mean, the quality of care
Yes.
is important. I think we just have to maybe instill a little more accountability into the program.
I know the director also, her and I have had discussions about, increasing communication with the school districts on that issue itself.
Yes.
So, we're gonna be working together on that piece.
Yes, because the school districts, essentially, the Committee on Preschool Special Education, they're the ones making the decisions. We're involved, Lisa goes to as many meetings as she can. But ultimately, the decision for placement and for the level of services is up to the districts, and we pay for it. So we wanna look at creative ways that we can work more closely with them to reduce costs without affecting the quality of care for the children. And I do wanna say that the preschool transportation costs are one area that the county could continue to take a closer look at and talk about some creative ways to maybe reframe how those services are provided, how the costs are formulated in terms of the bids. We've talked about that before in the past. That might be an area of savings.
And what would you say is the gap there?
With the transportation, the gap in terms of,
It's very costly.
it's over $1 million.
Right, and so how do we address that?
I mean, it's highly regulated in terms of the type of transportation and the requirements of the vendor in terms of what they need to provide. In terms of competition to lower that cost, I don't think there's much competition to lower that cost. It's a unique type of transportation and service. It's just, part of it's unfortunate with the amount of regulation that's required in terms of, but I think with this transportation committee that is now there in the county, that we may be able to get some creativity from that committee in lowering that, cause we also have the cost within DFS with the, Center for Workforce Development and the safety net transportation. So when you look at, if we look at our cost as a whole, instead of as individual and departments, I think again, that's an area where we'll be able to maximize, better than maybe we have in the past. So EI pre-K is a large local expense. Safety net within DFS continues to be a large local expense, with the state shifting 71% of that cost to the locality. But a lot of that safety net expense is in the housing area, and that's an area that we continue to focus on with reducing motel placements and getting more permanent and transitional housing. Within community services, I think Joe Todora has reduced local share as much as possible. And
We're pretty threadbare at this point. Most of the county share goes to support other county operations at this point, the building and all that other stuff. In terms of productivity, when we went to an open access model of services at our clinic, it's increased our numbers in terms of the people we're seeing. So interestingly, we're getting people in faster, we're engaging them in treatment faster, and we're actually discharging them faster. So I think the quality of care has actually increased. And,
How do you attribute, what do you attribute that to then?
I think it's really just kind of normal that if you're troubled and you can access somebody who can help you sooner, you're more likely to engage in that and complete successfully. But if you have to wait 4 to 6 weeks to see a social worker to get an assessment, then there's a good chance that you're probably not going to be too engaged in that process.
It just compounds the
Well,
problem.
and we waste a lot of staff time in terms of that. In the model that we have now, you guys just walk into our lobby at 9 o'clock in the morning. You would think we're giving something away. We're not. But there's at least 15 people there who are either new or regular people who we work with who want to see their therapist or who want an assessment. That's markedly different than the way it looked a year and a half ago. So we've really worked to become as efficient as possible, and we're also very cognizant of the fact that because of the insurance exchanges that New York State is in, we need our clients more than they need us at some point, because they're all going to have that magic card in their pocket and go anywhere they want as long as that managed care organization will pay the bill. And so we're not going to be the only game in town. So we're really trying to turn the divisions or the department's perception around a little bit. We don't want people to wait. We want to engage them in treatment. We want to, be as helpful as possible in the time that's necessary. So we've made a lot of changes. Most of what you'll see in terms of the county share, again, pays for services that we get from the county, like the county attorney's office, the MIS department. Those are just kind of some of those things that share goes to.
My final question is for Mary. Remember last year we were talking about Medicaid was coming in at 248 million and now it's 196. What do you attribute that change to?
The 248 million was all federal assistance coming in the whole department. So it was 191 million for Medicaid. It was 20 million for food stamp, and it was 7 million for HEAP, which added up to 248.
Oh, so that was all in.
Right. So this year we have 196 million in Medicaid, 22 million in food stamp, and HEAP's not over yet, so I'd say around 7 million for HEAP.
So that means that we're still at the same level as we were last year. That hasn't really changed. Okay. Thank you.
If I could just kind of change the focus and look at, if you look at the division as a whole and you look at your largest budgetary appropriation, which is your contract services.
What
looks
page are you
like
on, Cindy?
407. If you look at, 61 million for contract services, and I know one of your priorities is to monitor your contract services. If we look at September of 2013's monthly reports for the division, it looks like there were 72 contracts currently managing. Is that the total number of contracts?
I was just asking Josh on this contract services line. This is not, that number does not just include actual contracts. I mean,
It's everything in the, if you go to a detailed budget page, it's everything in the 4,000s. So that could be anything from office supplies to contracts to.
It's any vendor, it's any
It's
like
not just
contract?
vendors. Like I'm saying, it's if you look at just any random department, it could be anything all the way from office supplies to actual contracts, postage, dues, maintenance of the rent, indirect costs. It's anything in those 4,000 accounts. It's not just a contract with vendor ABC or XY. It's not.
So
That would be a
this-
subset of that.
So the 72 contracts that are reflected in the monthly report, which I understand is down, because if I remember correctly, when Director Ryan was here, that number was quite a bit higher, was it?
Yeah, that's because our EI contracts were taken over by the state health department.
So it reduced the number to 72?
It's about what we have now, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what,
But that's all contracts in both preschool and our certified home health agency and long-term care program.
right, so, cause I, at one time, I think it was up over 150, is that correct? Does anybody remember?
It was in the low hundred, yeah, one to 150.
Yeah, 'cause I'm
around
just,
there.
what I'm trying to figure out is, it's down to 72 contracts managing currently in the division as a whole. I'm just wondering, like, you did point out the EI, the state takeover of the EI. What is the figure for the 72 contracts from that contracted services? And are we monitoring those contracts? Do we have?
We'd have to compile some stuff, cause I don't think, you're not gonna easily find that on that page 407.
So the 61 million is.
But it's not, that's just not contract, like, that's gonna include travel, office supplies, pretty much anything
Any
departments are
operating-
spending, other than salaries and benefits, and like fixed assets, it's gonna include pretty much everything else.
So in each department, there's six departments, in each department, that number, contracted services, is gonna reflect all expenses as a whole,
Pretty much everything, for the
And
most part, everything other than salaries and benefits.
and include the 72 contracts.
Yes, that'll be a subset of that number.
Uh-huh. So what, I mean, in looking at 72 contracts, are they, is there adequate, oversight of those contracts now, or what?
I think the way that contracts are, DFS has a contract compliance specialist. Those contracts within DFS are monitored on a monthly and a quarterly basis by that individual person, by Joan Budenhagen. In the other departments, I think it's left up to program and administrative staff to monitor those contracts. I mean,
So for 70
contracts can, use more monitoring and compliance and more, communication between fiscal and program staff in terms of understanding the contract and maximizing the outcomes within it. So that is a focus contractually across the division in 14.
So out of the 72, how many, contract personnel do we have monitoring?
I mean, there's one division contract person, there is a second position in the DFS budget that is vacant right now, the person retired, and that is in the budget, proposed budget for 14, to fill that position.
I mean, internally, for our department, in terms of contracts monitoring, at the front end, in terms of, when services are authorized, as well as when services are paid for, that's where a lot of the monitoring takes place. And that's done by program and fiscal staff in each area. So if that's what you're looking for, in terms of how we monitor our contracts.
So for example,
Well, what's
the
that have to
youth
do with the
bureau,
budget? That's
they
my
have,
only
they
question.
contract with
Lesher
other
has
places.
contracts,
Lesher
right.
follows the contract, she puts out contracts, she makes sure that in fact what they say they're gonna do, they do.
She makes site visits to all the different contract agencies.
And that goes on with your other contract agencies?
I think Lesher, probably within Lesher's department, in terms of site visits, et cetera, she does it, it's a model to follow in other departments. I think.
And the other departments are not necessarily doing that.
Not
They're
as-
giving out a contract, and if they get a slip back saying that we spent such and such, that they get paid for it. There's no.
No, we trust, but we verify. So when somebody submits a voucher to us, we actually look to see if the work's got done. And once we are assured that the work has gotten done, we then pay that voucher.
Okay.
And, so we do that on the front end, and on the back end, we also, every year, our vendors have to submit to us a consolidated budget report that is audited and certified. And when we look at that budget report, as to whether the costs are within what was allocated for that year, and if there's a difference, we then, take care of what that difference would be. So we're very careful in terms of monitoring the contracts that we have, as.
That in fact, that what they said they were gonna do,
got
they
done.
did do.
Correct.
And if they said they were gonna do A through F and they only did A through D,
Right.
they don't get all the money.
Correct.
Somebody
That's
is
more in that
checking.
performance-based,
Yeah.
outcome-funded model. I don't think we're at a performance-based, outcome-funded model in terms of our contracts. I think they're more, we're purchasing the service, they provide the deliverables. I don't think we're penalizing vendors at this time if A, B, C, D, and E were not provided. I mean, it's a direction to possibly to move forward in.
Not
We're
to step
not?
on anybody, but it's a very interesting conversation, and it's a good conversation to have. But my question is, what does it have to do with our budget?
To bring down contract costs,
Contract services.
I understand that, but what,
it's part of the budget,
it-
it's a big number.
I understand that, but this is not the time or the place.
Next meeting. Just so you know, okay, we do remove charges that we're being billed for if we cannot verify that the service was provided. They have to provide us with notes and documentation, so we do that.
I just wanted to be
Right.
sure.
We do
Right, and if
remove
there's
them.
any question as to whether or not they overlap with other children, other providers, other
There's
services,
a lot of checks and balances.
those are
Okay.
removed from their vouchers and we do not pay for them,
So is the system working the
That's
way
nice
you
to
want it to
know.
work? That's kind of the
I think it
budget
can
issue.
improve, it can
Okay.
improve, and we're gonna focus on contract compliance and monitoring in 14.
And that's gonna require a change in the, not, taking Jean's point on, will there be, are you gonna need staff for that? Cause I know we've had
I
this
think we're gonna
conversation
do it, try to
circling
do it
around.
within our current staff,
Okay, so you're not making a request?
no.
Okay. Thank you.
More questions? Comments? Okay.
I think it's a mammoth job,
And
and
it-
I think we're getting there.
In a broader context, I guess in light of earlier, what direction are we going to give either Josh or these department heads to come up with reductions that total this 800,000? I didn't hear any questions directed to Randy as far as, do we want to, is that gonna be a directive to have the departments resubmit based on a reduced model, or is that something we want the budget office to do?
Well, I think in this case, you have, the contracts to look at, right? Cause that's,
We're looking at, could you
I don't
save-
think every department's gonna have the same issue.
Could you save $300,000 or $400,000 out of your budgeted contract service lines for 14?
If we're gonna stay within the.
Well, not if, we
already voted on
Yeah.
it. Well, we know there's a certain amount over what we have in the,
Well, I mean, that there's another question, are we willing to say to the departments they don't have to fund that, we're willing to use fund balance? I'm not.
Well-
No, I think the question needs to be asked here.
I'm not gonna ask him for a firm number. I would like him to save as much as possible, and I would like every department to save as much as possible, to see if we can come in with that figure. But it's gotta be total for all the departments, not just
So we
one.
want Josh to direct the departments to resubmit whatever savings they can generate
Absolutely.
without giving them
well,
a
that,
number.
Josh,
Absolutely.
isn't
Don't send it to
before
me.
that doesn't work?
Well, John does not, I think what you're referring to is this hypothetical 5, 10, it wouldn't have to be that, but whatever, you pick a number, 5% across the board doesn't work, because you can't marry that with your goal of not having layoffs and
Right.
other things, because a vast majority of the departments, especially in this building, are pretty much all salary and benefits, so if you give an arbitrary cut 5% or 10%, that means you're affecting staff.
Right.
I think what the comment was with Randy, when you're seeing $60 million of contracts, hypothetically, and it's not all contracts, but you could potentially reduce contracted services versus affecting staff. So you can't do this arbitrary random number across all the departments
No.
without having the personnel ramifications.
So we
I mean,
then have an overall goal.
I'm trying to understand
Well,
your initial comment.
The budget included
you weren't
a
here
tax
for-
levy increase that exceeded the tax cap. There was not sufficient support to override the tax
Okay.
cap. So we have to go back now and bring the budget down to come in line with the tax cap calculation, which is about an $800,000 reduction. So the discussion needs to shift to say to the departments or to the budget office, come up with something that closes the gap. That's the only option.
Okay, so
Without
division,
using
so
that.
division-wide from what the amended budget for 13 was, and then what was recommended for 14,
We have to go further.
You have to go off the record.
there's a $500,000 reduction already, so.
Yeah. you
Well,
leave
yeah,
it-
and I think he was just coming up with a hypothetical,
Yeah.
but it's not like you're
Yeah.
set in stone.
I don't
for 3 or
expect you to
4,
come
but
with the
it's-
whole $800,000.
It would, you
I know
probably
that's
have to
ridiculous.
then look at contracts and vacancies and maybe some of the
There's a
other
lot of other departments.
non-essential.
Like, name one.
Services.
Name one department that you can get that couple $100,000.
Regardless, I don't wanna get it
I'm not
tied
saying-
down into the department, I'm just saying,
Not-
what direction
That
are
man.
we going to give, because we have another meeting, it's a week from today. What, direction are we going to give? I mean, I'm assuming when you decided not to override the cap, there was some type of plan in place, what is that plan, so we can relay it to the staff, so the next week we can have a meeting that's more, it's nice to hear
If there is a number, I can work better with a number if we're trying.
Well, the overall number is what Jonathan said, but we're not expecting every
Yeah, they
department
can't
to
come
come
from-
with it.
And that
It's
overall number.
791,000.
Local
Yes.
dollars.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and we
Roughly
don't,
800,000.
and we don't want to, cut everybody off at the knees.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not just your division, it's
Right.
other countywide.
So, some of it may come from, contracts,
I
some
think
of
it's
it.
doable, it's just,
Right.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
doable.
Thank you. I think,
I don't
Can you make
think
up the
it,
791 doable, or you mean, I'm just gonna, I wanna ask
Oh.
you, before we move everybody else, before we have everybody else back to the table, I just wanna know.
It-
You said it's doable.
it depends if we are still going with no layoffs and no reduction in services or not, if we're willing to look at that
No
at
layoffs,
all.
I'm not
There's
doing
no
any
layoffs.
layoffs.
I
Right, so
will
no
not-
layoffs.
No
What about
layoffs.
reduction in services?
It's going to have to come to that, considering that the tax cap was voted that we can't override it.
That doesn't mean we have to
something
reduce
has to-
services. There's other ways to do this,
Well-
and that's up to the department heads.
something has to
I
give.
mean, if you
Good
give
luck.
us a week to go back at
It's
it,
not
and
luck.
I'll give
It's
you
their
my,
job.
my best.
That's why
Let's see if they
the
can find the
direction
money.
is, so
Give it
Josh
a
can
shot.
talk to all the departments the same, I mean, Randy happens to be here, so we're talking to him, but he can go back to all the departments with the same mission of, you need to provide reductions in county share by next Thursday,
Yeah.
Yes.
so we can have a report at next Thursday's meeting.
No, I had Mary redo the budget 7 times already.
Oh my, oh Mary.
Are you,
Was it-
are you sleeping in the
Was
building?
it 7 or 8?
You got till the first night of Hanukkah, you got 8.
8's the lucky number.
Hold on, go ahead.
Thanksgiving,
Well, we appreciate you going back.
first night of
Oh,
Thanksgiving.
I'm sorry.
No.
I just wanted to bring a point across that we can come up with any number you guys want, but that doesn't mean you're gonna reach that number by the end of next year,
Right.
okay? We have to go by and try to, project what we believe that the enrollment in these programs are gonna be for next year based on what we're doing now, okay? Based on the ideas and what actually hearings, maybe some things down the pike, that some places will be opening another program within, let's say, pre-K or whatever it would be. We can give you, like I said, any pie in the sky number, but that doesn't mean you're gonna hit it. And that doesn't mean that you're gonna stay underneath a 2% or a 2.5%.
But a budget is only a plan, and
That's
to the,
right.
and my understanding is that neither the property tax nor the retail sales tax have fluctuated that much in the last 3 to 4
Mhm,
years.
mhm.
So we know what we're coming into. The unknowns are the ones
Right.
that
Yeah,
are.
I just wanted to bring that across to people, because then they'll come back to us and say, well, why are you $400,000 or $500,000 over budget?
I know.
And that's gonna be the reason why.
And then we're gonna be punished because we
So you
didn't
just have
allow
to keep
the
that in
override.
mind, that's all,
But we know what we can live within, a certain range we can live within.
within a budget, within a projected budget, yeah.
That's
When
what I
it comes
think
to
is-
actual, that's what you're gonna be.
My
facing.
feeling is that was the intent in Albany for setting a tax cap in the first place. And the fact that their the Office of the State Controller and Tax and Finance are constantly going back and forth as to what's in and what's out is a game that Albany plays.
I
But
don't
we,
really think Albany knows what they're doing.
No.
well, that's a different issue.
Here, here.
So,
We need to know what we're doing.
I'll agree with you, and I'm a Democrat.
Yes.
Thank you, Randy, thank you for, your
Yeah.
staff that's coming, and we look forward
Thank
to
you.
some new stuff. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move it.
Jean?
Second.